Welcome to the HPE session at Red Hat Summit, going from OpenShift POC to production, and how you could accelerate the path with HPE. So my name is Kawai Liang, and I work in HPE Solutions Product Management. So I'm responsible for building the various container solutions at HPE. And joining me is my colleague.
My name is Michael Madsen. I'm actually a principal tech marketing engineer, but I do represent HPE Nimble Storage and product management within Nimble Storage. My primary responsibilities are like DevOps, containers, OpenStack, a lot of open technologies that HPE is involved in. So I'm going to talk about the storage pieces after Kawai's introduction.
Cool. So you guys okay as far as our voice? Did you guys could all hear? Or? Cool. All right. Sounds good. So this is the agenda for today. So we'll talk a little bit about bringing containers into production. Some of the different adoption paths and some of the different considerations. While we tend to be more technology people, we know it's a really combination of people, process, and technology. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Some of the technology considerations, and obviously, when we look at containers. And one of the reasons we had Mike here talking about kind of the data protection and container data management is, at the end of the day, data is critical, right? Something goes wrong with your containers, you could basically respin that up again. Something goes bad with your data, you're toast, right? So that data management piece is really a critical piece, and we'll definitely cover that later on. So we'll talk a little bit about how we could assist you with some of the service offerings. And some of the planning for success. And we promise to keep this to or the self-promotion to a minimal, okay? Even though this is the HPE session. All right, so in the interest of time, we will hold questions at the end, if you guys don't mind. Okay? So just save a couple of minutes. All right, so container adoption options. Just before we start, so how many of you guys are doing POC with containers, or just doing evals? Oh, cool. How many are actually going into production? Okay, maybe like half of you. Yeah, from actually what we have seen is, HPE is a large, so we have very large customers. I would say about like 20% of our customers are engaged in POCs, and maybe 5 to 10% of them are looking at containers. But the good news is every single one of our enterprise customers that we speak with all have container plans, right? So which is good. There's different ways when it comes to deploying containers, and that's why I kind of asked that questions. So our customer tends to look at different type of journeys. So the easiest way to kind of look at containers is you take some simple off-the-shelf applications like MySQL and some Microsoft applications. Just grab the container version, try it out internally within your IT organizations and just look at the benefits, right? Fast route to market and just get a quick sense of learning. But a lot of our customers actually are looking at two choices. One, where they are retooling legacy-based applications. There's like hundreds and thousands of these applications, where there's Unix-based, Solaris, IBM, Windows-based. So a lot of them are looking at how do we transition these applications to containers. So I think that's one. So we see a lot of customers looking at that. And there's also certain segments who are looking at, which is number 4, which is building these brand new ground-up-based applications. But what we say is most of the customers are looking, kind of starting from those baby steps, taking these legacy applications, wrapping them into one giant containers, and over time, win that POC, win that resource investment from the management, and then start slicing them up into microservices as the path to containerization. And also, they see that as also a good time to start adopting DevOps-based services. So it's not as simple as going to containers. It's the whole transformation, right? And that's the impact. So those are the things that we'll talk about a little bit, because at the end of the day, it's one thing to move from a simple POC, right? When you're looking at maybe tier 2 applications and you're not deploying this at scale, to moving to containers. So there's some key considerations as far as the impact on your kind of your organization And a lot of them will be brand new dev and release process, your whole governance around how the different organizations sign off, for example, for these applications. Of course, there's technologies and platform considerations. So one thing that we'll cover is why platform matters, right? Because we know at the end of the day, you guys have your choices. You could take all your containers and move it to the cloud, or actually keep them on-prem. Right? So it's the best CapEx, NOPEX type of decisions. Okay? So we'll touch a little bit about that. Certainly, those are the things that we hear a lot. So again, it's not just a pure technology play when people look at moving containers into production. Okay, so within HPE, we actually went through this process ourselves with our IT organizations. So we were doing tens of thousands of builds. If you guys are familiar with one of our software, it's called OneView. It's a platform management software. It's a big piece of software. So we're going through releases every single year. It's not what you call the agile process, right? So the thought is let's just update that build environment and start moving toward container adoptions. So our IT organization actually went through this. So not only from our IT organization, but as we talk to other customers, there's definitely considerations. So as you guys look at moving toward containerization, adopting the DevOps process, there's some big impact on organizations. So instead of releasing software once or twice a year, and even though you've adopted some of the newer release models, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, but you want to go full CI/CD, DevOps process, you're looking at your developers doing releases maybe every single week or so. There's certainly implications as far as from organization is concerned, right? People need to work really tightly together. You have to remove these boundaries. There's constant meetings. So it's not as simple as the product manager or the business owner just drop off the product requirements like what we traditionally do. You just kind of walk away and let the developers roll on their own, right? So it's constant tight integration among these organizations. And a lot of times you also get into what we see potential politics. Right? So with this new model, suddenly certain organizations, they control, and sometimes that's within IT ops. Lessons because there's more control being given to the development teams as far as releases are concerned. So there's definitely organizations and roles and responsibilities. Right? So these are some of the different type of kind of before and after. It's more from a command and control to what we call integrated and empower that development teams, right? So just an interesting anecdote. So Amazon in the old days, you look at Amazon started many, many years ago. So they have these big monolithic applications which runs their website. And they realized that's not happening because they're doing these releases every many, many months. So they start building microservices and adopting containers, right? And what they have done was they look at what they call a two-pizza model. So the two-pizza model is, your development team should only be large enough to feed 2 pizzas. So anytime you have your development teams that's larger than you could feed 2 pizzas, then you're too large a development team. Right? Again, the whole concept of building agile development teams, building ownerships, and adopting microservices. So it's an interesting spin on this. So there's definitely a lot of implications for this new model. For example, the whole change control is different, right? In the old days, instead of going to IT, request a change control. So now with DevOps, you go through a CI/CD pipeline like Jenkins or whatever favorite CI/CD tools you guys want to use, and everything's recorded, and you could put, for example, manual gated process in there. So it makes the whole change control and software release process much more faster. The other thing what we see is instead of having the developers control, just build everything, it's a nice cooperation. It should be a nice cooperation between the teams, right? So the developers are free to build their container images, but whilst with the IT ops people, you guys, whoever's on IT ops, should control the type of base images that you have sanctioned and you put out, like, for example, with some of the OpenShift catalogs that your developers should have access to, right? It should not be kind of the Wild Wild West where they could just download stuff on GitHub and just run anything they want. Of course, there's this whole security and ownership, which we will talk about. So in the past, ops kind of own security. So now with this new model where your developers might be adopting these first images from GitHub or from Red Hat's repository, they're downloading these images. So security gets kind of moved more upstream to your business owners and developers. So there's certain considerations for this. I think at the end of the day, it's about education and making sure everybody's comfortable with these changes as you're going through these type of transformation. Okay? So there's actually a lot of IT organizations who leverages third-party consultants, and there's a lot of consultants like Accenture who goes in and do this transformation. It's actually pretty complex. So again, I think what we're trying to say is just by wrapping your technologies around container, it's not going to get you fully to this agile kind of release model that you guys are looking for, right? It's got to be people, process, technology, and investment. Okay, technology considerations. So just because we know container is relatively new, just because they're containers, it doesn't mean that from IT organizations, you need to neglect lifecycle management, orchestration, security. Everything you guys are comfortable with from the IT side needs to apply for containers, right? And the difficult part is with containers, a lot of these tools are relatively brand new. So it's not easy to take some of the existing tools. For example, like security is a good example. So you're basically looking at brand new next generation type of tools that you might not have a lot of experience with, but yet at the same time, you want to roll this into production. You need to address that from IT ops perspective. And that's one of the reasons we saw, as much as customers like bare metal, we also saw a strong number of customers looking to just roll these containers on top of VMs, right? Whatever VM flavors, because they're comfortable running VMs. It's just another applications running on top of VMs, and VM today support all these type of capabilities instead of bringing in brand new tooling and going through the whole corporate governance process, right? So that's another option. But something to keep in mind. So we just touched upon a couple of them before I turn it over to my colleague Mike. So security is obviously very important. So when you look at security, it's more than just your typical network intrusion protection. So we look at security, at least from the HPE, from the bottom up. So for example, with a Gen 10 platform, we have something called root of trust. So why this is important, right? Because let's say you guys use white boxes. So you get these firmware updates or BIOS updates from your vendor. So God knows where they come from. And actually, I believe there was a famous hack because somebody leveraged some updates, firmware updates from a white box vendor that has security flaws in there. So within HPE, with our Gen 10 platform, we actually sign everything that we release. So that comes from HPE. Right? And of course, on the OS area, there's various OS, SE Linux, OpenScape, things that you could secure scanning on the OS. So there's a lot of good stuff happening on the OS area. And within HPE, we actually have a product called WASO, which is Workload Aware Secure Linux. So we offer that as part of our OpenShift package, which basically looks at the operating system as secured according to your own parameters, or we actually look at the NIST security recommendations. So we look at it from an OS perspective. But at the end of the day, it's really your registry, your container registry, and also your containers. So you have things running in containers. How do you try to peek in there, right, to make sure that there's not something that's doing something rogue? And also with your registry, with your developers downloading stuff off the internet, you want to make sure that you have very good scanning capabilities. So there's a lot of tools out there like Black Duck, for example. So there's a third-party partner of ours called Aqua Technology, who basically could scan all these code. So making sure these images that's being used within the pipeline are actually secure, and you could bless this, and you could actually via your access control, make sure that the right developers, go to certain type of gates, and certain type of developers with the right privileges, could then ship things into production. So make sure you build kind of access control into your whole CI/CD pipeline as to who could do what, right? But containers is definitely pretty secure. So from a third-party application, so how do you peek inside container, which is not easy? So as far as we know, there's only a few third parties who has those technologies. So Twistlock, for example, I mentioned Aqua earlier. So what you want to do is, once these containers are spinned up, be able to detect abnormal patterns. Right? So for whatever reasons, in case if your developer happen to have some rogue containers, for whatever reasons, you want those type of security software to be able to detect, like for example, if that container is trying to open up some ports, right, or try to access some resource where it's not supposed to, you want your security software to be able to flag those alarms and potentially just kill off those containers. Okay? So again, I think you might want to take a look at Aqua, Twistlock, and we also have a partnership with a company called Sysdig. And they have some pretty interesting stuff because they do a combination of both monitoring and security all rolled into one product. And so that's something that we offer also from our stack. So that's the security side. I think just in general, just the education process, right? Security is relatively new. So as you guys start moving these applications, giving the developers more control on the whole CI/CD release process, developers a lot of times need to be sensitized to some of these security implications, right? And make sure they follow security best practices. So I think just having the right education is really important, for security awareness and for your development teams. Okay, so monitoring. So monitoring is also definitely key. I mean, for IT ops, monitoring is critical for any deployment. So you need to look at monitoring from kind of a host all the way from Kubernetes, look at the Kubernetes infrastructure or your services. So it's a full monitoring stack that you need to look at, right? Again, there's not a lot of, from what we know, not a lot of these container-based monitoring software that's out there, from kind of a legacy vendor. So a lot of new stuff like Datadog. So Red Hat has CloudForms, but again, we partnered with Sysdig because we thought they were pretty good monitoring software. So the other things you guys want to look at from a monitoring software is making sure they have these CAN matrices and dashboards. So you don't want to build up like 20, 30 different your own monitoring scripts yourself. So for example, we know with Sysdig, they have like 30, 40 CAN basically monitoring matrices for various off-the-shelf containers, for Kubernetes, for some of the open source databases, for example. So that's one of the things I would tend to look at when you look at some of this monitoring software. Okay, so last thing before I turn over the mic is resource management. So you guys are familiar with this Kubernetes manifest, right? So you need to, as a developers, you need to specify CPU and resource usage. A lot of times developers are pretty conservative, right? Hey, not my money, I don't care. So I'm going to specify the most CPU consumption and resource usage, right? So what you want to do is make sure you have some really good resource management software out there, or else you would have a lot of these containers that's sucking up like empty spaces, especially if you have these containers sitting over at AWS, you'll be paying through the nose as far as billings are concerned. So we actually have been working with a third party called Densify. So there's a bunch of third parties out there who looks at these resource management, right? So certainly we think the leaders in this space is Densify or Turbonomics. So you guys might want to take a look into them because what they do is take a look at your resource consumptions, both on-prem and off-prem, and give you actually a projection, not only what you have right now, but also in the future. And they could tell you, for example, which hosts are not highly used or lightly used. So with some of the use cases we have seen, we saw customers saving hundreds of thousands of dollars, be able to build that map of resource consumptions on their containers. So it's something that you guys definitely look at. It's not something that people actually think about, but once you roll this into large-scale productions, you definitely want to have a very strong resource management capability out there. So I guess in the interest of time, I'm going to skip this one, make sure my colleague could talk about storage and data management. If I have time, I'll jump back. But you have this in your slides. So this is just some recommendations on, as you guys look at production, right? What types of size of configuration might you want to choose, depending on large scale, small, medium. So T-shirt size, small, medium, and large. Okay? So if I have time, I'll jump back to it, but I want to make sure my colleague has some time.
All right, thank you for that, Kawhi. You got more slides? Oh, Jesus Christ, you can be here all day.
Okay, I'll come back.
All right, excellent, excellent. So I'm going to talk a few minutes about what we do with the data management and data protection and persistent storage for containers in general. So a little bit of background is that, so I come from Nimble, and HPE also has a storage platform called 3PAR, and we provide the data services that each of those platforms provide. We abstract up into OpenShift and Docker and so forth, right? So those are external storage arrays, so to speak. And talking to customers and prospects for the last 2 years, my job has been nothing but kind of analyzing the use cases and so forth for persistent storage. And some of the use cases that we see that are popular out there is obviously CI/CD, right? And we have a bunch of different features for CI/CD that will help you to orchestrate your pipeline more efficiently if you have a lot of data in it, right? So for an example would be if you have like a 100 terabyte database that you want to give to your devs to run their tests on part of the pipeline, we can clone that database in an instant and make that available in a container in your test and dev environment. We integrate with all the popular tools out there, Jenkins, Microsoft Visual Studio Team Services, and so forth. And a fun fact is that Jenkins itself, that runs in a container, and Jenkins is a stateful application, and that requires persistent storage in itself. So another popular use case we have is lift and shift. We see customers want to migrate their traditional applications that they have running in their infrastructure. This could be anything from LAMP apps and ERP systems. They might be migrating from virtual machines to bare metal. Our container integration have tools to allow you to move your workload from your legacy environment into a container and carry the data with you. That is a feature that we're pretty alone with in the market at the minute. So, and that allows you to kind of, even if your application is 20 years old, it probably have this like traditional kind of silo type, but you can break down the monolith. And legacy applications, they always have some state somewhere, right? They weren't born 2018, where ephemerality and distributed storage is pretty common today, right? But migrating those legacy applications, you still need a reliable, persistent storage solution. You need to bring your SLAs and SLOs into your container deployment with them. A very popular pattern, I'm sure that many of you recognize this, that IT operations, they see container frameworks such as Kubernetes and OpenShift and so forth as means to deploy applications for their organization, right? And so we're an engineering-heavy organization at Nimble. We use all the Atlassian tools, right? And those you can run in containers today, supported by the vendor. The Elk Stack is another popular tool for the operations team to deploy in containers. And again, they all require persistent storage for those containerized applications. Again, LAMP apps is another popular use case. So container as a service is another one, right? So the IT ops folks that want to monetize their infrastructure, they basically want to deploy OpenShift clusters for others to consume, right? And key to that is also that they need to consume persistent storage in a safe and reliable way and make sure that data is being backed up, they have the right IOPS limit set and so forth, and have controls for noisy neighbors and things like that, right? So that we see a lot, that the service provider space, that they require features that are Amazon-like from their volumes, right? So they need to be able to provision out 1,000 IOPS volume to a certain application, a certain user, and they can then monetize that. So something I want to compare real quickly is, especially on the topic here, when we move from OpenShift from POC to production, is that the paradigms that are out there for persistent storage, they're very different, right? So in Nimble and 3PAR, for instance, we're like an external storage solution that is basically orchestration is being made in the background to provision a volume, format a file system, attach that to the host, and have the container bind mount into that container. It's a very simple construct, right? And the software-defined storage solutions out there, they're very different on how they protect their data, on how data is stored, how it's replicated. and it might not have the right data services that you're looking for, and so forth in a traditional enterprise. So I just want to bring this comparison sheet up here, right? And I don't want to talk to each and every point here. I just want to, these are like learnings that we've had from our customers there, where they basically deployed software-defined storage in a proof of concept environment. And the thing is that the developers love it because they can deploy that on their laptop and be productive from day one. And somehow that slips into the greenfield, and further it slips into production, right? And some of these software-defined storage solutions, they're not built for the type of scale to handle enterprise applications, right? So the CIO might come and ask for, so what's the SLA and RPOs and RTOs for this particular data? And they might not even be aware of that. The rights are not even consistent for the application. They don't know how to restore from snapshots. They don't know if the data is being replicated to a different site or into the cloud or whatnot, right? So because migrating traditional enterprise apps into containers, the storage requirements usually don't change, right? So that is something that we need to be aware of when we migrate stateful applications over to OpenShift. So I'm going to do some promotion here, what we do here in terms of integration. We integrate into all the major kind of frameworks for containers. OpenShift, we're OpenShift primed. We're part of the readiness program. We're also looking into going down the certification route with Red Hat. We have certified plugins for Docker. We integrate very well with upstream Kubernetes. We interop with the external volumes provider in Mesos and DCOS using the Docker volume driver isolator. Our storage platforms also have very comprehensive REST APIs, so you can kind of integrate this into any type of DevOps system that you might have, right? So whatever deployment pattern you have with Ansible or Puppet, the storage platform you manage just like any node in your infrastructure. We have very powerful tools and integration into the public cloud, especially on the Nimble side, where we can replicate data into our storage as a service that we have on Azure and Amazon. We support multiple use cases on how you can do on-ramping of your data from a containerized app that you have on-prem up to the cloud. We also have the ability to onboard data easily, as we have our plugin framework actually allows you to migrate data, for example, from a virtual machine sitting on VMware. We can vMotion that over to an Nimble array, and you can convert that into a containerized volume and use for your workload in OpenShift, for instance. We also want to make sure that from an operations standpoint that this is simple and easy to grasp. So we have a bunch of capabilities that allows you to set all these like characteristics of the storage that you provision that make sense for your particular workload and the applications being deployed. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next few slides here. Excuse me. So the persistent storage platform for Red Hat OpenShift that we have supports OpenShift Container Platform 3.5 to 3.9. We also support best effort with the OpenShift Origin if you want to run that in your dev and test environment, for instance. The integration is very simple. The Flex Volume plugin that is available in Kubernetes and OpenShift allows vendors as ourselves to write Flex Volume drivers. So we have a Flex Volume driver that integrates with both Nimble and 3PAR, and we also have a dynamic provisioner that allows users, cluster administrators, to define storage classes, and users then provision persistent volume claims from those storage classes. Today, this is using the Docker Volume API, so it is all built on open APIs, and the flex volume driver and the provisioner, it's an open source software available on GitHub, but we've integrated that into our product. So because we did a lot of investments in our container journey with Docker, so we just reusing our Docker volume plugin for OpenShift and Kubernetes as well. So we just shimmed that with a flex volume driver and a provisioner. So this type of paradigm works very well with both of our storage platforms. We also have integration coming with Azure and AWS to be able to use this same type of deployment in the public cloud as well. We can replicate to the cloud today with Nimble. In a few months, I'd say we will be able to run 100% cloud native. So how do we actually use this stuff in a real world scenario here? So I'm just going to show you a bunch of features. So this is actually the HPE Nimble Cube storage controller capabilities that we abstract up to OpenShift, right? So what you see here on the right-hand side is a bunch of features that we have on the Nimble platform, right? So for instance, we have full lifecycle management. It's highly available and so forth, and we have really cool provisioning controls depending on how you want the volume to be destroyed when you actually delete it and stuff like that to kind of preserve data in case of a human error. We have very sophisticated performance controls. We have something called performance policies. Those performance policies is based on data points that we've gathered over a customer base of 10,000 customers over the course of a few years through our SaaS-based analytics tool called HPE Composite. Performance controls will also allow QoS limits there where you can set IOPS or throughput limits on either volumes or a group of volumes in something that we call a folder. And that also sits next to the volume placement where you can control, if you have multiple Nimble arrays, you will be able to control placement if you want to put it on an all-flash array or a hybrid flash array, or if you want to put the volume in a particular folder to have a certain constraint attached to it. And some of the cooler features are actually at the bottom here where we can do zero copy clones of volumes. So if you have a 100 terabyte database that you wanted to clone to a new volume, start up a new container and run some test workload on that volume, we will be able to do that in an instant. Also the volume import is a very cool feature which enables us to migrate a virtual machine from any foreign storage system onto a Nimble array and then convert that volume into a volume to use for either Docker or OpenShift or anything else, and that is a rather kind of seamless migration. So these different capabilities here, they basically just turn into parameters, right? So these are the different parameters that we would push into the framework that is being used, right? So for the OpenShift case here, the admin would use something called a storage class, and would give the storage class a name, and it would also call out which provisioner to use, and in this case, hpe.com/nimble, and in the 3PAR case, that would be hpe.com/3PAR, right? And then you map those parameters that you see there in the storage class on the left side, maps to the parameters that you can specify from the right side, right? So you can kind of be very granular when you compose these storage classes. So in this case, when the user actually creates a persistent volume claim that he wants to map to his pod, he calls out the storage class name and a size of the volume he's requesting. The provisioner will then provision the volume, in this case, an encrypted volume with an IOPS limit of 1,000. Use the performance policy. In this case, it's just my policy because it could be a user-defined policy. But we have predefined policies like it's for SQL Server, Microsoft Exchange, and general virtualization workloads and so forth. And the protection template there is also a very, very important aspect of this because Nimble has a very powerful construct where where the storage admin can predefine like snapshot schedules and retentions and replication destinations down to either a secondary array or a replication store in the public cloud. And therefore, when the user provisions that volume, it will be automatically protected according to the SLAs and SLOs that the organization have set. So that way, the cluster admin and the storage admin, they're kind of in sync that, all right, you need to use this protection template if you want to protect this volume with snapshots and so forth. Right, and we also have ability to, those snapshots get enumerated on the volume, and we can do very cool things with that. So the user can actually clone that volume into a new container and to do any type of analysis or reporting, stuff like that. Excuse me. And that's all I had. So I'm going to invite Kawhi up to talk a little bit about what we do on the consulting side.
All right. So I want to talk about the title for this, this session about how HPE can help. So you've seen some really cool stuff from, I'm going to go back a little bit, from our storage colleagues. Sorry. But we actually have some really top value add on the platform area. So when we, that's what happens when we have slides out of sequence. Okay, there we go. So at the end of the day, when we talk to customers, they don't want to spend like months and months standing up the platform. They don't want to spend months and months going out there and carve up their own tooling sets, right? And they want a very well managed and production-ready platform. So last week, what we have done was we have announced a press release, a joint solution between HPE and Red Hat to jointly deliver a kind of end-to-end OpenShift solution to the marketplace to enable our customers to quickly stand it up and basically have a very well-managed platform. So the components, actually, let me ask this question. How many of you guys are actually HPE customers? Okay, hopefully we'll make you customers after this. Train your Dell boxes. Anyway, okay, enough self-promotion. All right, so what we have done was we have team up with HPE, with Red Hat to deliver joint professional services. As I mentioned earlier, when you look at this whole journey, a lot of it upfront work is going to be service heavy, and not every single customer is equipped to handle that transition, right? Of going from a non-container to containerized environment, adopting DevOps, and going through all these corporate changes. So having a strong service offering is a big plus. So we have teamed up with Red Hat to offer that upfront to you. But once you're ready to deploy, there's what we call day 0 and day 1, right? So what we have done with Red Hat is we have been working together to develop validated reference architectures. So not only do we have reference architectures, validated reference architectures, we actually have spent resources in building these Ansible playbooks along with Red Hat. So in essence, we could give you, in 2 hours on our Synergy platform, which is a composable platform, a complete OpenShift production-ready stack that has HA, persistent storage integration with our storage backend, has NFS, has monitoring. We actually will deploy some third-party monitoring tools on top, along with security. So that WASO product, a workload security product that I talked about from HPE. So the goal is to get you to as close to a production state as possible in less than 2 hours. And the cool thing is, with these Ansible deployment playbook, we will open source them. We'll put them up on GitHub so you could take them and modify it to any way that you choose to, right? This is cool if you guys are a service partner, for example. You could leverage it as a service offering to your end user customer base. So those playbooks will be available in the September timeframe. We have some early versions of those for cluster, but the more robust version 2, will be available in September timeframe. So you guys are interested, talk to us afterward. We'll give you a sneak peek. But the other things that we definitely want to promote is platform. At the end of the day, we want to say you have your choice on platforms, right? For you, it's a choice of either CapEx or OpEx. Right? So we have some interesting capabilities in a Synergy composable platform that we think lends itself to very large-scale container deployments. So I talk about these playbooks. So along with these playbooks, we then leverage our Synergy Composer and Image Streamer to enable our customers to capture these golden images and also quickly configure our Synergy systems on the fly. So you could do this in 2 hours. It's not that easy if you don't have the Synergy platform. So the other thing about the Synergy platform, which is really cool for containers, is we have disaggregated compute and storage. So we have customers who want to say, in the daytime, I want to have these very heavy compute environments and light storage. Nighttime, I want to have maybe light compute and heavy storage, right? Because I want to run these different jobs. So using a composer as a user, using these APIs and graphical user interfaces, they could basically recompose the system to take on these different type of workloads. So it's pretty easy, so just point and click. It's not something that you could easily do when you have these like pizza boxes, right? Just generate run-of-the-mill servers. So that's definitely a big plus. We talk about the data management piece, which is a big piece. And I think the other big piece is using our capabilities with composers and image streamers. It allows you to pre-bake these IT ops sanctioned images that you could then use our technologies to rapidly deploy them to all the hundreds of nodes. So again, doing change management is really critical. I guess doing change management effectively is really critical when it comes to mass scale container deployment, because you have a big stack of stuff that changes all the time, right? So once you lock down the golden images, you want to have a rapid way to quickly blast them out there to all those hundreds of nodes. So we gave you that capability along with Red Hat using Ansible and our Composer and Image Streamer technologies. So some pretty cool stuff. So you guys want to find out more, just drop by the HPE booth. We're down there. We're happy to tell you a little bit more.